the unexpected guest. Marcus Chin had learned to sleep through almost anything during his 3 years aboard Europa Station. The constant hum of life support systems, the periodic shutters when cargo ships docked at the main bay, even the occasional emergency drills that sent klaxons wailing through the corridors at ungodly hours. But the soft, deliberate knocking at his door at 2:30 in the morning was something entirely different. He groaned and rolled over, hoping whoever it was would take the hint and leave. The knocking came again, patient but insistent. 3 measured taps, a pause, then 3 more. Marcus threw off his thermal blanket and stumbled across his small quarters, barely avoiding the stack of data pads he had left scattered near his desk. His apartment was a modest space, exactly 12 meters square, filled with the accumulated clutter of someone who spent most of their waking hours managing cargo manifests and shipping schedules rather than maintaining a pristine living environment. Marcus pressed the door release without checking the viewer screen, a mistake he realized the moment the door slid open with its familiar hydraulic hiss. Standing in the dimly lit corridor was the last person, or rather, the last being he ever expected to see outside his door. Empress Velnara of the Kryn Dominion stood before him, and Marcus felt his brain simply stop processing information for several long seconds. He had seen her image countless times over the past 2 months since the Kryn delegation arrived at Europa Station for the historic peace negotiations. Her face had been broadcast across every news feed in human space. Those striking features were unmistakable: the violet-hued skin that seemed to shimmer faintly in low light, the 3 elegant cranial ridges that swept back from her forehead like a natural crown, the large eyes that held depths of silver and gold, pupils that contracted to vertical slits in bright light but now appeared wide and almost vulnerable in the corridor's darkness. She was not wearing her ceremonial attire, the elaborate garments woven with bioluminescent threads that he had seen in the diplomatic footage. Instead, she wore a simple dark cloak over practical clothing that looked almost ordinary, almost human, except for the way it was tailored to accommodate her taller, more slender frame. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. His voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Your Majesty, I think you have the wrong quarters." Something flickered in her expression, a brief shadow of what might have been disappointment or perhaps relief that he had not immediately raised an alarm. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, lacking the commanding resonance he had heard in the official addresses. The Kryn had translation technology far superior to humanity's, implanted directly in their neural pathways, so her words came through in perfect standard English with only the slightest harmonic undertone that marked it as translated speech. "I do not have the wrong quarters, Marcus Chin. May I come inside?" The use of his name jolted him fully awake. Marcus stepped back instinctively, his mind racing through 1,000 possibilities, none of them making any sense. The Empress of the Kryn Dominion, whose territory encompassed 17 star systems and whose military could reduce human space to glowing debris if they chose, was asking permission to enter his cramped, messy apartment in the middle of the night. "Yes, of course, please," he managed, gesturing awkwardly into the room. She entered with graceful steps, and Marcus noticed she moved with extreme care, as though trying to make herself smaller, less imposing. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Velnara stood in the center of his living space, looking somehow out of place and yet strangely fitting among his chaos of human belongings. Her gaze moved across the room, taking in the scattered data pads, the half-empty coffee bulbs magnetically attached to various surfaces, the single potted plant he kept trying to keep alive despite the station's recycled air, and the wall screen frozen on a historical documentary he had fallen asleep watching. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said, her long fingers clasping and unclasping in what his limited knowledge of Kryn body language suggested might be nervousness. "And for the hour. I am aware this is highly irregular." "Irregular," Marcus repeated, finding his voice again. "That's one way to put it. Your Majesty, where is your security detail? There should be at least a dozen Kryn warriors within 10 meters of you at all times. The treaty negotiations, the political situation, you shouldn't be here alone." Her cranial ridges shifted slightly, a movement he had learned indicated emotional distress among the Kryn. "They believe I am in my quarters, resting under medical supervision. I left a recorded message in my quarters explaining I needed solitude for meditation, a practice they understand and respect. By the time they realize I am truly gone, I will have returned." Marcus ran both hands through his hair, a nervous habit his mother had always tried to break him of. Okay, so the most important dignitary in known space has snuck out of her quarters and come to see me, a nobody cargo coordinator who once accidentally shipped medical supplies to a mining outpost instead of a hospital frigate. This is actually happening. The corners of her mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile but something approaching one. You are not a nobody, Marcus Chin. You spoke at the cultural exchange presentation 3 weeks ago. You discussed how humans find meaning through connection, through the relationships they build across distances and differences. You quoted an ancient Earth philosopher who said that no man is an island. Your words stayed with me. Marcus remembered that presentation with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. He had been terrified, speaking before an audience that included representatives from both human and Kryn leadership. But he had meant every word. I spent the entire time convinced I was going to pass out or say something offensive. I'm pretty sure I referred to Kryn familial bonds using the word for livestock herding at one point. You did, Velnara confirmed, and this time there was definitely amusement in her tone. It was endearing. You were the only speaker who seemed genuinely interested in understanding rather than impressing. Every other human spoke of humanity's achievements, its resilience, its technological progress. You spoke of loneliness and the human need to be seen, truly seen, by another being. She moved slowly to his small couch and gestured toward it questioningly. Marcus nodded quickly, watching as she settled onto the cushions with obvious relief, as though she had been carrying a great weight and could finally set it down. Would you like something to drink? Marcus asked, defaulting to the hospitality instincts his grandmother had drilled into him as a child. I have water, terrible station coffee, or tea that tastes vaguely like tea if you squint and don't think about it too hard. Tea would be welcome, thank you. She arranged her hands in her lap, a formal gesture that seemed at odds with the informal setting. I should explain why I am here. You deserve that much. Marcus busied himself with the beverage dispenser, grateful for something to do with his hands while his brain continued attempting to process the impossible situation. He selected 2 clean cups from his limited collection, filled them with the station's approximation of chamomile tea, and returned to sit in the chair across from her, maintaining what he hoped was a respectful distance. Velnara accepted the cup with both hands, holding it close to her face and inhaling the steam. Her eyes closed briefly, and Marcus noticed the tension in her shoulders ease fractionally. When she opened her eyes again, they held something he had not expected to see: exhaustion, deep and profound. I have been Empress of the Kryn Dominion for 7 years, she began, her voice soft but clear. I inherited the throne when my mother was killed in the border skirmishes that preceded these negotiations. Since that moment, I have not had a single hour where I was truly alone, where I was not being watched, advised, protected, or required to make decisions that affect billions of lives. She took a careful sip of the tea, and Marcus watched her expression shift to something that might have been pleased surprise. This is actually quite good. The station surprised me too, Marcus said. Usually beverages are where food services give up and accept defeat. For 68 days I have been on this station, Velnara continued, setting the cup on the low table between them. Every day filled with negotiations, ceremonies, diplomatic functions, cultural exchanges. Every meal is a performance. Every conversation is analyzed. Every gesture is interpreted for political meaning. My attendants monitor my health, my sleep patterns, my stress levels. My advisors present me with reports that require immediate attention. The human diplomats watch me for signs of weakness or deception, and I must watch them for the same. It is necessary work. Important work. These peace negotiations could end decades of conflict between our peoples. But I am tired, Marcus Chin. I am so very tired. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the tea forgotten in his hands. You came here to not be the Empress for a while. I came here because I remembered your words about connection. About being seen. Her vertical pupils contracted slightly as she met his gaze directly. I have not had a conversation in months where the person speaking to me saw Velnara instead of the Empress. Where words were exchanged for the simple reason of exchanging words, not to negotiate or persuade or maintain diplomatic protocols. I saw your name on the station roster. I remembered you spoke of loneliness as something humans understand deeply, something they fight against. I thought perhaps you might understand this need. The vulnerability in her admission struck Marcus with unexpected force. Here was a being whose species had mastered faster-than-light travel while humans were still arguing about whether to fund their first Mars colony, whose empire's military might could crush human civilization, sitting in his cramped apartment and asking to simply exist as a person rather than a position. I understand, Marcus said quietly. More than you might think. Before I took this posting, I worked on a deep space hauler. 6-month runs with minimal crew, most of that time spent alone in my quarters staring at the same 4 walls. You learn real quick that being surrounded by people and being truly connected are completely different things. At least in space you know you're alone. On a station with 5,000 people, you can be lonely in a way that actually hurts. Velnara's cranial ridges lifted slightly, an expression he was learning meant interest or attention. How did you manage it? The loneliness. Badly mostly, Marcus admitted with a self-deprecating smile. But eventually I figured out that what I needed wasn't to be around people. It was to be around someone who gave a damn whether I existed or not. Someone who would remember if I disappeared. I started actually talking to my crewmates instead of just exchanging shift reports. Turned out they were lonely too. We started having dinner together, playing ancient card games, telling stories about where we came from. Nothing profound, just existing together. Existing together? Velnara repeated softly. What a beautiful phrase. Among my people, we have a concept, Velcor, which translates roughly as the warmth of witnessed life. It means the comfort that comes from having another being know you are there, not for what you can do or what you represent, but simply because you exist. That's exactly it, Marcus said, feeling something click into place. You don't need me to solve your problems or give you advice or help with the negotiations. You just need somebody to know you're here. Yes. The word came out as almost a sigh. For a few hours, I need to not be the weight of 17 star systems and the hope of lasting peace. I need to be someone who can drink mediocre tea in a cluttered apartment and speak about nothing important with someone who will not record my words or analyze my meaning. Marcus set his cup down and leaned back in his chair. Then that's what we'll do. No politics, no diplomacy, no pressure. Just two people existing together. Though I should warn you, my conversational skills peak at roughly 3 in the morning and then decline sharply, so if I start rambling about obscure human sports or my theories about why the station's recycling system sounds different on Tuesdays, you have permission to tell me to shut up. For the first time since entering his quarters, Velnara smiled fully, a genuine expression that transformed her features from regal to something much more approachable. I would very much like to hear your theories about the recycling system. Among my people, I am considered quite observant about mechanical systems. It drives my attendance to distraction. Really? Marcus felt himself grinning. Okay, so you know how most of the station systems run on a predictable cycle? Everything's automated, everything's scheduled down to the minute. But the recycling system in this sector makes this specific rattling sound every Tuesday around 1400 hours, and only on Tuesdays. I've been here 3 years and I still can't figure out why. Velnara leaned forward slightly, her earlier exhaustion seeming to lift as genuine curiosity sparked in her eyes. Have you checked the maintenance schedules? Often irregular sounds correspond to human maintenance patterns rather than mechanical issues. That was my first thought too, but maintenance in this sector runs Thursday mornings. I even pulled the service logs. Nothing scheduled for Tuesdays. Fascinating. She tilted her head, her cranial ridges shifting in a way that suggested she was thinking deeply. Could it be resonance from another section? If a heavy cargo ship docks on Tuesdays at a specific bay, the vibrations might travel through the station's infrastructure and interact with the recycling system's operational frequency. Marcus blinked. Holy hell, that actually makes sense. There is a regular freight delivery every Tuesday afternoon. How did you figure that out in 10 seconds when I've been puzzling over it for months? I designed the life support system for the Kryn flagship, Velnara said, and there was a hint of pride in her voice. Before I became Empress, I was an engineer. I spent years crawling through conduits and arguing with construction crews about proper acoustic dampening. It was the happiest time of my life. Something in the way she said those last words, wistful and tinged with loss, made Marcus's chest tighten. You gave it up when you became Empress. I gave up many things. She picked up her tea again, cradling the warmth. The throne is not a choice among my people. It is a duty that falls to the eldest child of the ruling family. When my mother died, there was no question of whether I wanted the responsibility. There was only the reality that I was needed. That's a hell of a burden, Marcus said quietly. It is the burden I was born to carry. She looked into her tea as though searching for answers in its depths. I do not regret my duty. The peace we are building here could save countless lives on both sides. The conflicts between our peoples have cost too much already. If I can end that through these negotiations, then everything I have sacrificed will have meaning. But sometimes, I wish I could return to being the engineer who worried about acoustic dampening and resonance frequencies instead of the Empress who must weigh every word against the survival of civilizations. Marcus thought about his own life, the choices he had made, the paths he had walked. He had never faced anything close to the weight Velnara carried, but he understood the feeling of being trapped by circumstances, of duty overriding desire. My grandmother used to say that even Atlas, the titan who held up the sky, needed someone to talk to. Being strong doesn't mean you can't be tired. Velnara's eyes met his, and in that moment, Marcus saw not an alien empress from an advanced civilization but simply a person who had been carrying too much for too long and desperately needed to set it down, even if just for a few hours. "Thank you," she said softly. "For understanding. For not treating this as strange or inappropriate. For giving me this space to simply be." "Anytime," Marcus replied, and he meant it. "Though next time, maybe text ahead so I can at least hide the embarrassing research papers and put on pants that don't have a hole in the knee." She laughed then, a genuine sound of amusement that seemed to surprise her as much as it delighted him. "I shall endeavor to provide advance notice for future midnight visits." They sat together in comfortable silence for a moment, two beings from different worlds finding unexpected common ground in a cluttered apartment on a space station orbiting Jupiter's frozen moon. Outside, the universe continued its eternal dance, vast and uncaring. But inside Marcus's quarters, something smaller and infinitely more precious was taking root. A connection between two lonely souls who had found, against all odds, exactly what they needed in each other's company. Marcus raised his teacup slightly. "To mediocre tea and the recycling system mysteries." Velnara lifted hers in response, her smile genuine and unguarded. "To Velcor, the warmth of witnessed life, and to new friendships across the stars." Their cups met with a soft clink, a tiny sound that somehow felt significant, a small beginning to something neither of them fully understood yet but both recognized as important. And for the first time in 68 days, Empress Velnara of the Kryn Dominion felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, if only for a moment, in the presence of a human cargo coordinator who understood that sometimes the greatest gift one being can offer another is simply to see them as they truly are. Understanding beyond worlds. The tea had grown cold, but neither Marcus nor Velnara seemed to notice or care. They had moved past the initial awkwardness of the impossible situation and settled into something that felt almost natural, two beings sharing space and conversation without the weight of expectation pressing down on every word. Marcus had relocated to the other end of the couch, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that their conversation felt intimate rather than formal. Velnara had removed her cloak, draping it carefully over the arm of the furniture, and Marcus noticed that without it she looked somehow younger, less burdened. Her cranial ridges had settled into a relaxed position, and her posture had lost the rigid formality he had observed in all the official footage. "Tell me about engineering," Marcus said, genuinely curious. "What was it like designing life support systems for a flagship?" That sounds simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. One miscalculation and everyone dies horribly in the vacuum of space. Velnara's eyes brightened with enthusiasm, and Marcus realized this was probably the first time in months anyone had asked her about something she actually cared about rather than matters of state. It was both terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The Kryn approach to life support is fundamentally different from human systems. We use biointegrated technology, living organisms that process atmosphere and maintain environmental balance. The challenge is creating fail-safes for biological systems that can adapt and evolve. She gestured as she spoke, her long fingers tracing invisible diagrams in the air. Humans build redundancy through mechanical backups, multiple independent systems running parallel. We build redundancy through diversity, multiple species of atmosphere processors that fulfill similar functions but through different biological pathways. If one fails, the others compensate. The flagship system took 4 years to design and another 2 to cultivate the initial colonies to full operational capacity. Marcus leaned forward, captivated despite knowing almost nothing about advanced bioengineering. "Wait, so your life support systems are alive? That's incredible and slightly disturbing. What do they eat? Do you have to feed your air recyclers?" "They process the same waste products they are meant to eliminate," Velnara explained, and there was definite amusement in her tone at his reaction. "It is a closed system, elegant in its efficiency. Though yes, in the early design phases, there were incidents where maintenance crews forgot to manage the nutrient balance and entire sections became overrun with atmospheric processors. The smell was indescribable. Even alien engineers have, oops, we created too much algae moments," Marcus said, grinning. "That's strangely comforting. I once rerouted a shipment that was supposed to go to agricultural research and sent it to a military training facility instead. They got 3 tons of fertilizer. The complaints I received were creative and very specific about what they hoped would happen to my career." Velnara laughed, that same genuine sound he had heard earlier, and something in Marcus's chest warmed at the knowledge that he could bring that out in her. "Did you face disciplinary action?" 3 weeks of extra shifts and a mandatory retraining course on shipping protocols, Marcus said. But the real punishment was having to personally apologize to the training facility's commanding officer, who spent 15 minutes explaining in excruciating detail why Marines did not need fertilizer and what she thought of logistics coordinators who couldn't tell the difference between a military base and a farm. I've triple-checked every manifest since then. Humiliation is often the most effective teacher, Velnara observed. When I was still an apprentice engineer, I miscalculated the thermal expansion coefficient for a coolant system. The first time it cycled to operational temperature, the conduits expanded and created a harmonic resonance that made the entire engineering deck sound like it was screaming. My supervisor made me present my calculations to the entire engineering department and explain exactly where I had made my error. I was certain I would never be allowed near a critical system again. But you went on to design life support for a flagship, Marcus pointed out. So either you learned from it or you're really good at hiding mistakes. I learned that failure is only permanent if you refuse to understand what went wrong, Velnara said. And that asking for help is not weakness but wisdom. 2 things that served me well in engineering but have been difficult to remember as Empress. When I make decisions now, the consequences affect not just a coolant system but entire populations. The stakes make it harder to admit uncertainty. Marcus heard the shift in her tone, the way the conversation was sliding back toward the weight she carried. He made a split-second decision to redirect before that burden could settle back onto her shoulders. Okay, so I have a completely serious question that's been bothering me about Kryn biology ever since your delegation arrived. Your people don't sleep the way humans do, right? I've read the briefing materials, but they were written by scientists who seemed more interested in being technically accurate than actually explaining anything useful. Velnara tilted her head, her cranial ridges shifting in what Marcus was learning to recognize as curiosity. We do not experience sleep in extended periods like humans. We enter rest states for shorter durations throughout our day cycle, usually 30 to 40 minutes at a time. Our consciousness never fully disengages, more like a meditative trance where our bodies regenerate while our minds remain partially aware. That sounds exhausting, Marcus said honestly. Humans need to completely shut down for hours at a time or we start hallucinating and making terrible decisions. Although to be fair, some of us make terrible decisions anyway, so maybe sleep isn't the determining factor. Your sleep fascinates us, Velnara admitted. The idea of becoming completely unconscious and vulnerable for such extended periods, trusting in the safety of your environment and the protection of others. It speaks to a fundamental trust in your communities that Kryn never fully developed. We evolved on a world with many predators. Deep sleep meant death. So we adapted to rest in shorter cycles, always maintaining some level of awareness. Marcus considered this, thinking about the implications. That must make trust harder for your people. If you're biologically programmed to never fully let your guard down, it would affect everything. Relationships, diplomacy, even how you approach peace negotiations. Velnara was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice held a note of surprise. I have never considered it from that perspective, but you may be right. Our cultural emphasis on vigilance and self-sufficiency, our difficulties in forming alliances with other species, perhaps these are rooted not just in our history but in our biology. We are always waiting for the predator, even when none exists. And here you are, in a human's quarters at 3 in the morning, surrounded by a species that goes completely unconscious for 8 hours at a time, Marcus said softly. That must take considerable courage to trust that deeply against your own instincts. Her eyes met his, those striking silver and gold depths holding something that looked like gratitude mixed with wonder. You see things clearly, Marcus Chin. You take complex truths and express them simply, without pretension or political maneuvering. It is a rare gift. I'm just a guy who reads too much and thinks too hard about why things are the way they are, Marcus said, but he felt himself flush slightly at the compliment. My grandmother used to say I was born asking, why, and never stopped. She meant it as a criticism, but I took it as a badge of honor. Tell me about your grandmother, Velnara said, settling deeper into the couch cushions. She sounds like someone who shaped you significantly. Marcus smiled at the memories that surfaced. She raised me after my parents died in a transport accident when I was 7. She was this tiny woman, barely came up to my shoulder even when I was 14, but she had this presence that made everyone listen when she spoke. She believed in 2 things absolutely, that kindness costs nothing, and that understanding someone doesn't mean agreeing with them. He paused, collecting his thoughts. She ran a community kitchen in the Mars colonies back when they were still rough and new. Fed anyone who came through the doors, no questions asked. Miners, refugees, people who'd made bad choices and were trying to start over. She'd serve them food and then sit with them just listening to their stories. She used to tell me that everyone carries their own weight, and sometimes the heaviest burdens are the ones nobody can see. Velnara's expression softened. She sounds like she understood Velcor even if she had no word for it. The importance of witnessing another's existence. Yeah, Marcus said, his throat suddenly tight. She died 6 years ago, heart failure. But before she went, she told me that the most revolutionary thing a person can do is to genuinely see another person, really see them, and let them know they matter. Not because of what they can do or provide, but just because they exist. I've tried to live by that. She would be proud of you, Velnara said quietly. You honored her teaching tonight by extending it to someone from another world. I think she'd be terrified I let alien royalty into my messy apartment without cleaning first, Marcus joked, but his voice was thick with emotion. But yeah, maybe she'd understand. Though I should mention that by her standards, I should be offering you actual food, not just terrible tea. I have ration bars that claim to be chocolate but are probably lying. I am not hungry, but I appreciate the offer. Velnara looked around the room again, and Marcus tried to see it through her eyes. The cluttered desk with its scattered data pads, the entertainment screen with its paused documentary, the single plant struggling valiantly to survive in recycled air, the collection of physical books he had accumulated despite the impracticality of shipping printed materials across space. Your living space reflects who you are. This is not the quarters of someone who values appearance over substance. That's a polite way of saying I'm a slob, Marcus said, but there was no defensiveness in his tone. No, Velnara said firmly. This is the space of someone who prioritizes learning and growth over superficial order. These books, these research materials, they speak of curiosity and a desire to understand. The plant suggests you value living things even when caring for them is difficult in this environment. The documentary you were watching was about Earth's early space exploration, which means you maintain connection to your species' history even as you help build its future. This room tells a story of someone thoughtful and intentional. Marcus felt unexpectedly moved by her analysis. Nobody had ever looked at his living space and seen anything but chaos. You got all that from my mess? I got that from observing someone who matters, Velnara said simply. You asked me earlier what I needed. This is part of it. To see and be seen without filters or pretense. To have conversations that matter because they are genuine, not because they serve political purposes. To remember that beneath all the titles and responsibilities, we are simply beings trying to make sense of our existence. The negotiations, Marcus said carefully. They're going well, aren't they? From what I've heard through the station gossip, both sides are close to agreement. Velnara's cranial ridges shifted, a complex movement that suggested mixed emotions. They progress. We have resolved most of the territorial disputes, established protocols for future interactions, and agreed upon cultural exchange programs. The framework for lasting peace exists. But the final treaty requires me to make a choice that weighs heavily on my conscience. She fell silent, and Marcus waited, understanding that she would continue if she wanted to, and that pushing would violate the trust they had built. After a long moment, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. The final clause requires the Kryn Dominion to accept human observers in our territory, full access to our systems and stations for diplomatic and trade purposes. It is reasonable, necessary for building trust. But my military advisors fear it is too much vulnerability, too much risk. They counsel rejecting this clause and continuing negotiations for something less comprehensive. They remind me that my mother died fighting humans, that our peoples have been enemies for decades, that trust must be earned slowly. But you want to accept it, Marcus said, hearing the conflict in her voice. I want peace, Velnara said, and there was such exhaustion in those 3 words that Marcus's heart ached. I want to end the cycle of fear and violence that has consumed both our peoples. I want to build something better than what we inherited. But I am terrified of being wrong, of making the choice that leads to more death, more suffering. How do I weigh the possibility of peace against the certainty of risk? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his grandmother, about trust and vulnerability, about the courage it took to let your guard down when every instinct screamed danger. Can I tell you what I think, as someone with absolutely no political authority or diplomatic training? Please, Velnara said. I think peace requires someone to go first, Marcus said slowly, choosing his words carefully. Someone has to be willing to take the risk, to extend trust even when it's terrifying, because otherwise both sides just keep waiting for the other to make the first move and nothing ever changes. Your mother died fighting humans, and that's a weight you carry. But how many human parents died fighting Kryn? How many children on both sides grew up without mothers and fathers because we couldn't figure out how to trust each other? He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. You came to my quarters tonight because you needed to trust someone, really trust them, even though every instinct probably told you it was dangerous. You're Kryn, programmed to never fully let your guard down, and you're the Empress with the weight of 17 star systems on your shoulders. But you did it anyway. You took that risk because you knew that without trust, without genuine connection, you'd just keep carrying that weight alone until it crushed you. Velnara's eyes had grown bright, and Marcus realized with shock that Kryn could cry, though their tears were different from human ones, catching the light like liquid silver. You think I should accept the clause? I think you already know what you want to do, Marcus said gently. I think you came here tonight not just to escape the weight but to remember why you're carrying it in the first place. Peace isn't a contract or a set of protocols. It's millions of small acts of trust, people choosing to see each other as people instead of threats. You wanted to be seen tonight, Velnara, not as the Empress but as someone who matters just because she exists. What if that's what both our peoples need? Not perfect security or guaranteed safety, but the chance to see each other clearly and choose trust anyway. A single silver tear traced down her violet cheek, and she made no move to wipe it away. What if I am wrong? What if this trust leads to disaster? Then you'll deal with it the same way you dealt with the screaming coolant system, Marcus said. You'll figure out what went wrong, learn from it, and build something better. But at least you'll know you tried. At least you'll have given peace a real chance instead of letting fear make all your decisions. Velnara was quiet for a long time, and Marcus let the silence stretch, understanding that she was processing, thinking through implications and possibilities. When she finally spoke, her voice was stronger, more certain. My people have a saying, Cor Velathan Marques. It means, witnessed courage grows into shared strength. When one person takes a brave action and another bears witness to it, both become stronger. You have witnessed me tonight, Marcus Chin, seen my doubts and fears and uncertainties. And in being seen, I find I have the strength to choose trust over fear. I'm glad, Marcus said simply. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. But more importantly, I think it's your choice made for the right reasons. That matters. She smiled then, a full genuine smile that transformed her face. Thank you. For the terrible tea, for the conversation, for seeing me as more than my title. For reminding me why the weight is worth carrying. Marcus glanced at the chronometer on the wall and was startled to see that nearly 4 hours had passed. It's almost time for the morning shift change. Your security detail is probably staging a full-scale search by now. Velnara stood gracefully, reaching for her cloak. They will be relieved to find me unharmed and philosophical about my evening adventure. Though I suspect my head of security will require sedation once the initial relief passes. I'd apologize, but I'm not actually sorry, Marcus said, standing as well. This was unexpected and slightly terrifying, but also probably the most meaningful conversation I've had in years. As was it for me. She fastened the cloak around her shoulders, once again becoming the figure who could walk through station corridors without attracting undue attention. May I ask you something, Marcus Chin? Anything. When the peace is signed, when our peoples begin to truly interact and build connections, would you consider serving as a cultural liaison? Someone who understands both the importance of protocol and the deeper truth that we are all simply beings seeking connection and understanding. Marcus felt his breath catch. You're offering me a job? I am offering you an opportunity to help build the peace we discussed tonight. To take your grandmother's wisdom about seeing and being seen and extend it across species. Your insights into trust and vulnerability, your ability to cut through complexity to find simple truths, these are exactly what we need as our peoples learn to work together. I'm a cargo coordinator, Marcus said, though his heart was racing. I ship things from place to place and occasionally send fertilizer to the wrong address. You are someone who understands that peace is built one connection at a time, Velnara corrected. Someone who knows that the most revolutionary thing we can do is genuinely see another person. I need people like you, Marcus Chin. Both our species do. Marcus thought about his grandmother, about her community kitchen and her belief in the power of witnessing another's existence. He thought about the conversation they had shared tonight, about trust and vulnerability and the courage it took to go first. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I'd be honored to help. Velnara placed her hand over her heart, a Kryn gesture of deep respect and gratitude. Then we will speak again soon, under less clandestine circumstances. Perhaps with advance notice and an opportunity for you to hide the embarrassing research papers. Marcus laughed. I'm going to hold you to that. She moved toward the door and Marcus activated the release. Before stepping into the corridor, she turned back one final time. May I ask one more thing? Of course. The next time I need to not be the Empress for a few hours, to simply exist without the weight of civilizations on my shoulders, may I return here? May I share terrible tea and conversation about recycling systems with someone who sees me as Velnura rather than a title? Marcus felt something warm and certain settle in his chest. You're welcome anytime. Though fair warning, I might actually clean next time, so the authentic cluttered experience may be compromised. I shall risk it, she said, and there was affection in her tone. Thank you, Marcus Chin, for reminding me why we fight for peace. For witnessing my existence tonight. Farvelkur? Anytime, Marcus said softly. That's what friends do. Her eyes widened slightly at the word, and then her expression transformed into something radiant. Friends? Yes. I would very much like to be friends. And then she was gone, slipping into the corridor with practiced quiet, leaving Marcus standing in his doorway watching her disappear toward the diplomatic quarters. He stood there for several minutes, processing everything that had happened, before finally closing the door and turning back to his apartment. The teacups still sat on the table, cold and forgotten. The couch cushions held the imprint of where they had sat. The chronometer insisted that morning shift change was in 20 minutes and he should probably prepare for work. But Marcus felt fundamentally changed, as though the last 4 hours had shifted something essential in his understanding of the universe and his place in it. He picked up the teacups and placed them in the cleaning unit, but found himself smiling as he did so. Somewhere on Europa Station, an alien empress was preparing to make a choice that could reshape the future of two species. And she had made that choice, at least in part, because a nobody cargo coordinator had offered her terrible tea and genuine connection in the middle of the night. His grandmother would have understood perfectly. Sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply to see another person, to witness their existence, and to let them know they mattered. And sometimes that simple act could change everything. Marcus prepared for his shift, but his mind was already racing ahead to the future, to the peace that would be signed and the bridges that would be built. He thought about cultural liaison positions and the opportunity to help build understanding between species. He thought about friendship that crossed the boundaries of biology and culture. Most of all, he thought about a tired empress who had needed someone to see her, really see her, and had found that understanding in the last place anyone would have expected. In the vast darkness of space, aboard a station orbiting a frozen moon, two beings from different worlds had found connection. And in that connection, they had discovered something that would ripple outward far beyond one cluttered apartment and one night of honest conversation. They had discovered that peace begins not in treaties or protocols, but in the simple, revolutionary act of choosing to trust, to be vulnerable, and to genuinely see another being as worthy of witness and connection. The war between humans and Kryn would end not because of military might or political maneuvering, but because an empress and a cargo coordinator had shared terrible tea at 3 a.m. and remembered what it meant to be seen. And that, Marcus thought as he headed out to face another day of shipping manifests and logistical challenges, was the most human thing of all, finding hope and building peace through simple acts of connection, one relationship at a time. The future was uncertain, as futures always are. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus Chin believed that future might actually be bright.